Marcus Williams sat in the back corner of the crowded courtroom, his hands shaking as he held a crumpled tissue. The 24-year-old veteran had never felt so small in his life. Around him, people whispered and pointed, their eyes filled with judgment and disgust. He tried to make himself invisible, but the tears streaming down his face made that impossible. The charges against him seemed impossible to believe. Breaking and entering, theft, assault, 3 felony counts that could send him to prison for 15 years. Marcus knew he was innocent, but the evidence seemed to tell a different story. Security cameras showed someone who looked exactly like him breaking into Mrs. Henderson's house on Maple Street. The stolen items were found in his apartment. His fingerprints were on the jewelry box. Judge Patricia Hoffman looked down at Marcus with cold, calculating eyes. She had been presiding over criminal cases for 20 years, and she had seen every type of criminal walk through her courtroom. In her mind, Marcus was just another young thug trying to get sympathy with fake tears. Mr. Williams, Judge Hoffman's voice echoed through the courtroom, sharp and unforgiving. I understand you wish to represent yourself in this matter. That's certainly your right, though I must say it's not advisable given the serious nature of these charges. Marcus stood up slowly, his legs feeling like jelly. Yes, Your Honor. I can't afford a lawyer, and the public defender assigned to me doesn't believe my story. I have to speak for myself. The judge's lips curled into what might have been a smile, but there was no warmth in it. Very well. Please state your plea to the charges. Not guilty, Your Honor. I didn't do any of those things. I was at the VA hospital that night, getting treatment for my nightmares. I have the paperwork to prove it. Judge Hoffman glanced at the documents Marcus had submitted earlier. Mr. Williams, these medical records show you were there earlier in the evening, not during the time of the alleged crimes. The break-in occurred at 11:30 p.m., and your last documented appointment was at 7:45 p.m. Marcus felt his heart sink. But, Your Honor, I stayed longer. I was having a panic attack, and the nurses let me rest in the waiting room until I felt better. They can confirm this. Do you have any witnesses to support this claim? The judge asked, already knowing the answer. Well, no, Your Honor. It was late, and most of the staff had gone home. But there might be security footage from the hospital that shows I was there. Judge Hoffman made a note on her papers. Mr. Williams, security footage that might exist is not evidence. What we have here are clear security images of you breaking into Mrs. Henderson's home, stolen property found in your possession, and your fingerprints on the victim's belongings. These are facts, not maybes. The tears in Marcus's eyes began to flow more freely. The stress of the past 6 months had been overwhelming. Since returning from his deployment in Afghanistan, he had struggled with post-traumatic stress disorder, nightmares that kept him awake for days, and a constant feeling that danger lurked around every corner. The last thing he would ever do was break into someone's home and steal from them. Your Honor, Marcus said, his voice cracking with emotion, I served 2 tours in Afghanistan. I fought for this country. I would never do what they're accusing me of. Something is wrong here. Someone is setting me up, but I don't know who or why. The gallery behind him erupted in quiet murmurs. Some people shook their heads in disbelief, while others whispered cruel comments about how military service didn't excuse criminal behavior. Marcus heard fragments of their conversations, typical veteran excuse, and they all come back damaged, and just another criminal trying to use his service as a get-out-of-jail-free card. Judge Hoffman raised her hand to quiet the courtroom. Mr. Williams, while I respect your military service, it does not give you license to commit crimes. Many veterans return from deployment and successfully reintegrate into civilian life without resorting to criminal activity. But I didn't commit any crimes. Marcus shouted, his composure finally breaking completely. The stress, the sleepless nights, the constant anxiety, and now this public humiliation was too much to bear. He sobbed openly, not caring anymore who saw him or what they thought. The judge's expression grew even colder. Mr. Williams, control yourself. This is a court of law, not a therapy session. Your emotional outburst does nothing to change the evidence against you. The prosecutor, A sharp-dressed woman named Sarah Mitchell stood up with a satisfied smile. Your Honor, the defendant's emotional instability only supports our position that he is dangerous and should be remanded to custody immediately. His military training makes him particularly dangerous to the community. Marcus tried to wipe his tears, but they kept coming. Please, Your Honor, I'm not dangerous. I just need help. I need someone to believe me and investigate this properly. I'm being framed, and no one will listen. Judge Hoffman's voice dripped with disdain as she addressed the crying young man before her. Mr. Williams, I have presided over thousands of cases, and I can tell you that every guilty defendant who stands before me claims they are being framed. Your tears might work on a jury of your peers, but they have no effect on me. I deal in facts and evidence, not sob stories. The courtroom fell silent, except for the sound of Marcus's quiet sobs. He felt completely alone, abandoned by the legal system he had sworn to protect. His lawyer had quit, his family lived 3 states away and couldn't afford to travel, and his few friends from the military were dealing with their own struggles. Mrs. Henderson, the elderly victim of the break-in, sat in the front row with her daughter. She watched Marcus cry and felt a strange mixture of anger and confusion. The young man before her didn't look like the violent criminal she had imagined. He looked broken, desperate, and genuinely confused about why he was there. The prosecutor continued her argument. Your Honor, Mr. Williams has shown no remorse for his actions. Instead, he's trying to manipulate this court with fake emotions and claims of innocence that fly in the face of overwhelming evidence. We ask that he be held without bail pending trial. Marcus looked up at the judge through tear-blurred eyes. Your Honor, I don't have anyone else to turn to. If you don't believe me, I don't know what I'll do. I came back from war broken, and now I'm being accused of crimes I didn't commit. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Judge Hoffman had heard enough. Mr. Williams, your theatrical performance is noted, but not appreciated. This court operates on evidence and facts, not emotional manipulation. If you cannot control yourself, I will have you removed from this courtroom. The young veteran tried to compose himself, but the weight of everything was crushing him. His service in Afghanistan had already taken so much from him. He had lost friends, his peace of mind, his ability to sleep through the night, and his sense of safety in the world. Now, he was losing his freedom and his reputation. I'm sorry, Your Honor, Marcus whispered, still crying. I don't mean to be disruptive. I just don't understand how this happened to me. I've never been in trouble before. I've never even gotten a speeding ticket. The judge looked at her watch impatiently. Mr. Williams, your clean record is noted, but it does not negate the evidence before us. Many first-time offenders have clean records until they don't. As Marcus stood there, feeling the weight of the entire courtroom's judgment, he couldn't help but think about his fellow soldiers who didn't make it home. He wondered if this is what they would have wanted for him, to be humiliated and imprisoned for crimes he didn't commit. He thought about his squad leader, Sergeant Rodriguez, who had always told him that America would take care of its veterans when they came home. The irony was bitter and overwhelming. He had survived roadside bombs, sniper attacks, and 2 years of constant danger, only to be destroyed by his own country's legal system. The tears continued to flow as he realized that his life, as he knew it, was over, regardless of whether he was ultimately found guilty or innocent. The damage to his reputation and his mental health was already done. Judge Hoffman's patience had run completely thin. She leaned forward in her chair, her eyes flashing with irritation as she watched Marcus continue to sob. The young man's shoulders shook uncontrollably, and every few seconds, a small whimper escaped his lips despite his efforts to stay quiet. Mr. Williams, the judge said, her voice cutting through the courtroom like a blade. I have had quite enough of this display. You are a grown man, not a child. If you cannot compose yourself like an adult, perhaps you should have thought about that before you decided to commit these crimes. The gallery behind Marcus buzzed with whispered comments. Some people seemed uncomfortable with the judge's harsh tone, while others nodded in agreement. A few court regulars, people who spent their days watching trials for entertainment, chuckled quietly at the spectacle before them. Marcus tried desperately to stop crying, but the judge's words only made it worse. Each harsh comment felt like another nail in the coffin of his dignity. He had faced enemy fire without flinching, had carried wounded comrades to safety under extreme pressure, and had completed missions that required nerves of steel. Yet here, in this courtroom, he felt completely helpless and out of control. "Your Honor," Marcus managed to say between sobs, "I'm not trying to be disrespectful. I just can't understand how someone could frame me like this. I've been having nightmares about this for months. I wake up every night thinking about prison." Judge Hoffman's expression grew even more contemptuous. "Mr. Williams, let me make something crystal clear to you. This courtroom is not the place for your therapy session. Your nightmares, your emotional problems, and your inability to control yourself are not my concern. My concern is justice for Mrs. Henderson and protecting the community from criminals." The prosecutor, Sarah Mitchell, couldn't hide her satisfaction as she watched the judge tear into Marcus. This was going even better than she had hoped. A defendant who couldn't control his emotions, and a judge who clearly had no patience for what she saw as manipulation, was the perfect combination for a quick conviction. Furthermore, Judge Hoffman continued, raising her voice so that everyone in the courtroom could hear clearly. "I find it particularly offensive that you would come into my courtroom and try to use your military service as an excuse for criminal behavior. Do you think that because you wore a uniform, you're above the law? Do you think your service entitles you to break into people's homes and steal their belongings?" Marcus looked up at her with red, swollen eyes. "No, Your Honor. I would never think that. I'm proud of my service, but I'm not trying to use it as an excuse. I'm just trying to tell you that I didn't do these things. Someone who looks like me did them, but it wasn't me." Several people in the gallery rolled their eyes. The idea that someone had an identical twin who was framing them was such a cliched defense that it had become a joke in legal circles. Even some of the court staff exchanged knowing glances. Judge Hoffman's voice rose to a level that made several people in the front row lean back in their seats. "Mr. Williams, I have been on this bench for 20 years. I have seen every type of criminal, every type of excuse, and every type of manipulation tactic imaginable. What I'm seeing from you right now is textbook emotional manipulation designed to make me feel sorry for you." Marcus felt like the walls of the courtroom were closing in on him. The fluorescent lights seemed too bright, the air felt too thick, and the sound of his own heartbeat was loud in his ears. These were the same sensations he experienced during his worst panic attacks, but he couldn't have one here. Not now. Not in front of all these people. "Your Honor," he whispered, "I think I'm having a panic attack. Could I please have a moment to collect myself?" The judge's response was swift and brutal. "Oh, how convenient. Now you're having a panic attack. Let me guess, Mr. Williams, this is all part of your post-traumatic stress disorder, correct? How many times do you think I've heard that excuse? Every veteran who commits a crime suddenly has PTSD when they get caught." The cruelty in her voice shocked even some of the court personnel. The bailiff, a former military man himself, shifted uncomfortably. The court reporter's fingers paused over her keyboard for a moment, surprised by the judge's tone. Marcus felt something break inside him. It wasn't just his composure or his dignity. It was his faith in the system he had sworn to defend. Here was a judge, someone who was supposed to represent justice and fairness, mocking his genuine mental health struggles and dismissing his service as if it meant nothing. "I'm not making excuses," Marcus said, his voice getting stronger despite his tears. "I have documentation of my PTSD from military doctors. I have medical records showing my treatment. This isn't something I made up when I got arrested. I've been dealing with this since I came back from Afghanistan 3 years ago." Judge Hoffman waved her hand dismissively. "Mr. Williams, half the criminals who appear before me claim to have some sort of mental illness. It's become the go-to defense for people who don't want to take responsibility for their actions. You're not special, and your alleged PTSD doesn't make you special either." The word alleged hit Marcus like a physical blow. His PTSD wasn't alleged. It was real, documented, and devastating. He had spent countless hours in therapy, taken medications that made him feel like a zombie, and struggled every day just to function normally. To have it dismissed so casually by someone in authority was almost more than he could bear. Mrs. Henderson, the elderly victim sitting in the front row, found herself feeling increasingly uncomfortable. She had come to court expecting to see justice served, but what she was witnessing felt wrong. The young man before her seemed genuinely distressed, and the judge's treatment of him seemed unnecessarily cruel. "Your Honor," Mrs. Henderson's daughter, Linda, whispered to her mother, "this doesn't feel right. Maybe we should talk to the prosecutor about a plea deal or something." Mrs. Henderson nodded slightly, but she was confused about her own feelings. She had been robbed, and she wanted justice. But watching this young man cry and be humiliated in front of a room full of strangers made her stomach turn. Judge Hoffman was just getting warmed up. "Mr. Williams, let me tell you something about real veterans. Real veterans come home and build productive lives. They get jobs, they support their families, and they contribute to society. They don't break into old ladies' houses and steal their jewelry. They don't make excuses and cry when they get caught." Marcus felt a surge of anger mixed with his despair. "Your Honor, with all due respect, you don't know what real veterans do. You don't know what it's like to watch your friends die, to come home to a country that doesn't understand what you've been through, and to struggle with nightmares and flashbacks every single day." The courtroom fell silent. Even the judge seemed momentarily taken aback by Marcus's sudden show of backbone. For just a moment, his words had cut through the theatrical nature of the proceedings and revealed genuine pain. But Judge Hoffman quickly recovered her composure and her disdain. "Mr. Williams, spare me your war stories. This courtroom is not the place for your self-pity parade. You are here because you committed crimes, not because you're a victim of war." The young veteran looked around the courtroom, seeing nothing but unsympathetic faces staring back at him. He felt completely isolated, as if he were the only person in the world who knew the truth about his innocence. The evidence against him was overwhelming, but he knew he hadn't committed these crimes. Someone had set him up perfectly, and he had no idea who or why. "I just want someone to believe me," Marcus said quietly, his voice barely audible in the large courtroom. "I just want someone to investigate this properly and find out what really happened." Judge Hoffman's final comment before the next phase of the hearing would stay with Marcus for the rest of his life. "Mr. Williams, belief is something you earn, and you haven't earned mine. What you have earned is a place in the state penitentiary, and if I have anything to say about it, that's exactly where you're going." The heavy wooden doors at the back of the courtroom opened with a soft creak, but no one paid attention. Court sessions were public, and people wandered in and out throughout the day. What was unusual was the measured, confident footsteps that echoed across the marble floor, cutting through the tense atmosphere like a knife. Marcus was still crying, though more quietly now, his spirit broken by Judge Hoffman's relentless verbal assault. He didn't notice the new arrival, nor did most of the gallery. They were too focused on the drama unfolding at the front of the room. The man who entered wore a crisp dress uniform adorned with ribbons and medals that spoke of a distinguished military career spanning decades. His posture was ramrod straight, his gray hair perfectly groomed, and his presence commanded immediate attention from those who bothered to look. He was General Robert Hayes, though none of the civilians in the courtroom recognized him. General Hayes had come to the courthouse on a completely different matter. He was scheduled to testify in a military contractor fraud case later that afternoon. But as he walked past Courtroom B, he heard something that made him stop in his tracks. Through the partially open door, he heard Judge Hoffman's harsh words about veterans and her dismissive comments about PTSD. The general had commanded thousands of soldiers over his 35-year career. He had seen young men and women go off to war and return changed forever. He had personally written letters to the families of soldiers who didn't come home at all. The judge's words about real veterans and her mockery of combat trauma struck him like a physical blow. He stepped into the courtroom quietly, taking a seat in the back row. His trained eye immediately assessed the situation. A young veteran, clearly distressed, standing before a hostile judge. The defendant's posture, his attempts to maintain military bearing even while crying, and his respectful manner of addressing the court all told the general that this was a soldier in trouble. Judge Hoffman was continuing her verbal assault, apparently energized by her ability to reduce the defendant to tears. Mr. Williams, I want you to understand something. Your crying performance might work on bleeding heart liberals who think every veteran is a victim, but it won't work on me. I believe in personal responsibility. Marcus wiped his eyes with his sleeve, a gesture that reminded General Hayes of countless young soldiers he had counseled over the years. The boy was trying so hard to maintain his dignity while being systematically destroyed by someone who clearly had no understanding of military service or combat trauma. Your Honor, Marcus said, his voice steadier now, but still thick with emotion. I understand you don't believe me. I understand the evidence looks bad, but I'm telling you the truth. I would rather die than steal from an elderly lady. That's not who I am, and it's not what my country taught me to be. The judge's laugh was cold and bitter. Oh, please. Now you're going to lecture me about patriotism? You, a common criminal, are going to tell me about serving your country? That's rich, Mr. Williams. General Hayes felt his jaw clench. In his decades of military service, he had developed an eye for character. He could spot a liar, a coward, or a criminal from across a room. The young man, standing before the judge, displayed none of those characteristics. Instead, he saw integrity under pressure, respect for authority, even when that authority was being abusive, and genuine confusion about his circumstances. The prosecutor, Sarah Mitchell, decided to pile on. Your Honor, I think Mr. Williams has demonstrated exactly why he should be remanded to custody immediately. His emotional instability, combined with his military training in weapons and combat, makes him extremely dangerous to the community. This comment made General Hayes lean forward in his seat. The prosecutor was using the defendant's military service as evidence of dangerousness rather than as proof of his character and dedication to his country. It was exactly the kind of attitude that made it difficult for veterans to reintegrate into civilian society. Marcus's shoulders sagged even further. Your Honor, I'm not dangerous. I've never hurt anyone except in combat when it was my job to protect my fellow soldiers. I came back from Afghanistan wanting nothing more than to live a quiet life and maybe help other veterans who are struggling like I am. Judge Hoffman's response was swift and merciless. Mr. Williams, your touching story about wanting to help other veterans is noted, but it doesn't change the fact that you're a criminal. Maybe you can start a support group in prison for veteran inmates. I'm sure there are plenty of them. The comment about veteran inmates seemed to particularly anger someone in the back of the courtroom, but Judge Hoffman was too focused on her verbal assault to notice. General Hayes gripped the edge of the wooden pew where he sat, his knuckles turning white. Marcus looked up at the judge with genuine confusion. Your Honor, why are you so angry with me? I understand you think I'm guilty, but why do you seem to hate me personally? I don't understand what I did to deserve this kind of treatment. The question seemed to catch Judge Hoffman off guard for a moment. In her 20 years on the bench, very few defendants had been brave enough to question her demeanor directly. Most were intimidated into submission long before they worked up the courage to challenge her behavior. Mr. Williams, the judge said, recovering quickly, I don't hate you. I simply have no patience for criminals who try to use their military service as a shield. Every time someone like you commits a crime and then hides behind their uniform, it makes real veterans look bad. General Hayes had heard enough. The judge's comments revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of military service and a shocking lack of respect for the men and women who had sacrificed for their country. He stood up slowly, his movement causing several people in the gallery to turn and notice him for the first time. Marcus was still trying to defend himself and his fellow veterans. Your Honor, I'm not hiding behind anything. I'm proud of my service, but I'm not using it as an excuse. I'm just asking you to consider that maybe, just maybe, I'm telling the truth about being innocent. The judge's voice reached a new level of condescension. Mr. Williams, let me explain something to you about truth. The truth is what the evidence shows, not what you wish it showed. The truth is that you were photographed committing these crimes. The truth is that stolen property was found in your possession. Those are facts, not feelings. But what if the evidence is wrong? Marcus asked desperately. What if someone planted those things in my apartment? What if the person in the video just looks like me? What if there's an explanation that nobody has bothered to investigate? Judge Hoffman's laugh was harsh and dismissive. What ifs don't matter in my courtroom, Mr. Williams? What ifs are what guilty people use when they can't explain away the evidence against them. The general in the back of the courtroom was studying the entire scene with the analytical mind of someone who had spent decades making life and death decisions based on incomplete information. Something about this case didn't sit right with him. The defendant's demeanor, his genuine confusion, and his consistent story all suggested that there might be more to this case than met the eye. Marcus made one last attempt to reach the judge's humanity. Your Honor, I'm not asking you to let me go free. I'm just asking you to consider that there might be reasonable doubt here. I'm asking you to remember that I'm a human being who served his country and deserves to be treated with basic dignity. Judge Hoffman's final response before the courtroom dynamics changed forever would echo in the general's mind for years to come. Mr. Williams, dignity is something you earn, and criminals don't deserve it. You lost any claim to dignity the moment you decided to break into Mrs. Henderson's home. Now stop your pathetic crying and prepare to face the consequences of your actions. The sound of polished military shoes clicking against the marble floor suddenly filled the silent courtroom as General Hayes began walking toward the front of the room. The rhythmic sound of military dress, shoes against marble grew louder as General Hayes approached the front of the courtroom. Every step was measured and deliberate, carrying the weight of 35 years of military command. The sound was so distinctive that even people who had never served in the military could recognize the bearing of a career soldier. Judge Hoffman looked up from her papers, annoyed by the interruption. Excuse me, sir, but this is a court proceeding. Please take your seat or leave the courtroom. General Hayes continued walking until he reached the bar that separated the gallery from the court well. He stood at attention, his posture perfect, his uniform immaculate. The ribbons and medals on his chest told the story of a distinguished career that spanned multiple deployments and decades of service to his country. Your Honor, the general said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. I apologize for the interruption, but I feel compelled to address some statements that have been made in this courtroom regarding military service and veterans. The judge's expression shifted from annoyance to surprise. She had noticed his uniform, of course, but now she was seeing the stars on his shoulders and the impressive array of decorations that marked him as a very senior officer. And you are? Judge Hoffman asked, her tone becoming noticeably more respectful. General Robert Hayes, United States Army, he replied crisply. I am here today to testify in another matter, but I couldn't help but overhear some deeply troubling comments about veterans and military service. Marcus looked up through his tears, unable to believe what he was seeing. A general officer was standing in his courtroom, apparently coming to his defense. After hours of humiliation and disrespect, someone in authority was finally paying attention to his situation. The prosecutor, Sarah Mitchell, immediately sensed that the dynamic in the courtroom had shifted dramatically. She had been confident in her case and her ability to secure a quick conviction, but the presence of a general officer changed everything. The optics of prosecuting a veteran in front of a high-ranking military official were suddenly very complicated. General Hayes, Judge Hoffman said, trying to regain control of her courtroom. While I respect your service, this is a criminal proceeding involving serious felony charges. I'm not sure what you think you heard, but General Hayes cut her off with a raised hand, a gesture that had silenced a room full of colonels and generals throughout his career. Your Honor, I heard every word that was spoken in this courtroom over the past 15 minutes. I heard you mock this young man's military service, dismiss his combat trauma as an excuse, and make generalizations about veterans that are both inaccurate and deeply offensive. The courtroom had fallen completely silent. Even the court reporter had stopped typing, transfixed by the confrontation unfolding before her. This was unlike anything anyone had ever seen in Judge Hoffman's courtroom. Marcus couldn't believe what was happening. For months, he had felt completely alone, abandoned by everyone who was supposed to help him. His public defender had quit, his family couldn't afford to support him, and the legal system seemed determined to railroad him into prison. Now, suddenly, one of the highest-ranking officers in the United States Army was standing up for him. Judge Hoffman's face was turning red, though whether from embarrassment or anger was unclear. "General, I appreciate your concern for your fellow service members, but this defendant is accused of serious crimes. The evidence against him is overwhelming." General Hayes turned to look at Marcus for the first time since entering the courtroom. What he saw confirmed his initial assessment. The young man was still crying, but he was standing at a modified position of attention, showing respect even in his distress. His uniform shirt was wrinkled but clean, his hair was regulation length, and his demeanor was that of a soldier under extreme stress but still trying to maintain his military bearing. "Son," the general said, addressing Marcus directly, "what's your name and unit?" Marcus straightened up as much as he could, wiping his eyes quickly. "Marcus Williams, sir. Specialist, first class. 82nd Airborne Division, 1st Brigade Combat Team. 2 tours in Afghanistan, sir." The general nodded approvingly. Even in civilian clothes and under extreme stress, the young man had responded with proper military courtesy. "And what are you accused of, Specialist Williams?" "Breaking and entering, theft, and assault, sir. But I didn't do any of those things. I was at the VA hospital that night, getting treatment for my PTSD. Someone who looks like me committed these crimes, but it wasn't me." General Hayes turned back to Judge Hoffman, his expression stern. "Your Honor, in my 35 years of military service, I have learned to read people very quickly. It's a skill that has kept me and my soldiers alive in combat situations around the world." This young man is not lying. The prosecutor jumped to her feet. "Your Honor, I object. This general, regardless of his rank, is not an expert witness in this case. He has no knowledge of the evidence or the circumstances of the alleged crimes." Judge Hoffman was clearly flustered. She had built her reputation on being a tough, no-nonsense judge who didn't tolerate disruptions in her courtroom. But she had never faced a challenge from someone of General Hayes' stature and presence. "General Hayes," the judge said, trying to sound authoritative, "I understand your desire to support a fellow veteran, but this court operates on evidence, not on your ability to read people." General Hayes' response was measured but firm. "Your Honor, with all due respect, this court seems to be operating on prejudice against veterans rather than on a fair evaluation of evidence. I have listened to your comments about military service, your dismissal of combat trauma, and your treatment of this young soldier, and I find it deeply disturbing." The general's words hung in the air like a challenge. Everyone in the courtroom understood that they were witnessing something unprecedented. A judge was being publicly criticized by a general officer for her treatment of a veteran defendant. Marcus felt a surge of hope for the first time in months. Someone with real authority and credibility was finally listening to him and taking his side. The tears in his eyes now contained relief, mixed with continued fear. Mrs. Henderson leaned over to her daughter Linda and whispered, "Maybe we should reconsider this whole thing. If a general thinks something is wrong with this case, maybe something really is wrong." Linda nodded, her own doubts about the prosecution growing stronger. The young man's reaction to the general's support seemed genuine. If he were truly guilty, wouldn't he be more focused on trying to manipulate the situation rather than showing such obvious relief and gratitude? General Hayes continued his assessment of the situation. "Your Honor, Specialist Williams served 2 tours in Afghanistan with the 82nd Airborne. That division has one of the most distinguished combat records in the United States Army. The men and women who serve in that unit are volunteers who chose to put themselves in harm's way to defend this country. Judge Hoffman tried to interrupt, but the general's voice carried over hers. Furthermore, his military record, which I can access through official channels, shows no disciplinary problems, no criminal activity, and commendations for bravery under fire. This is not the profile of someone who would return home and commit petty crimes. The prosecutor realized that her case was being undermined by someone with far more credibility than she had. Your Honor, regardless of Mr. Williams's military record, the evidence in this case is clear. We have video footage, physical evidence, and General Hayes turned his attention to the prosecutor, his gaze intense. Ma'am, in my experience, when evidence seems too perfect, it often is. I have seen cases where good soldiers were framed by enemies who wanted to destroy their credibility and their lives. Have you considered that possibility here? The question hit the courtroom like a bombshell. No one had seriously considered the possibility that Marcus might be the victim of a deliberate frame-up. The evidence had seemed so clear, so overwhelming, that the idea of a conspiracy hadn't occurred to anyone involved in the case. Marcus looked up at General Hayes with something approaching worship in his eyes. Sir, that's what I've been trying to tell everyone. I think someone set me up, but I don't know who or why. General Hayes studied Marcus's face intently, using the same skills that had helped him identify potential threats and allies in war zones around the world. What he saw was not the shifty-eyed calculation of a criminal, but the desperate honesty of someone telling the truth under impossible circumstances. Specialist Williams, the general said, "Tell me about your living situation. Who has access to your apartment? Who knows your daily routines? Who might have reason to want you discredited?" Marcus wiped his eyes and tried to think clearly despite the emotional turmoil of the past few hours. "Sir, I live alone in a small apartment complex. My landlord has a key, and the maintenance staff can get in when I'm not there. I don't really have any enemies that I know of, but what, son?" General Hayes prompted gently. "Well, sir, there's this guy named Derek Phillips who lives in my complex. He was in the Army too, but he got a dishonorable discharge for stealing from other soldiers. He always seemed angry that I got an honorable discharge and veterans benefits. He made some comments about how it wasn't fair that I got help when he didn't." The prosecutor shifted uncomfortably in her seat. This information had never come up during the investigation. No one had bothered to look into potential enemies or people who might want to frame Marcus. Judge Hoffman was also becoming uncomfortable, but for different reasons. The presence of General Hayes had completely changed the atmosphere in her courtroom, and she was no longer in complete control of the situation. General Hayes, while this speculation is interesting, we still have the matter of physical evidence that was found in Mr. Williams's apartment. General Hayes nodded thoughtfully. Your Honor, physical evidence can be planted. Video evidence can be misleading, especially if someone deliberately tries to impersonate the suspect. Has anyone investigated whether this Derek Phillips bears a physical resemblance to Specialist Williams? The silence in the courtroom was deafening. No one had investigated anything beyond the surface evidence. The case had seemed so straightforward that no one had bothered to dig deeper. Mrs. Henderson stood up slowly from her seat in the front row. "Excuse me, Your Honor," she said in a shaky voice. "I think I need to say something." Judge Hoffman looked annoyed. "Mrs. Henderson, this is highly irregular. You're the victim in this case, not a witness." The elderly woman ignored the judge's objection and addressed General Hayes directly. "General, I've been sitting here listening to everything, and I have to say that something has been bothering me about this whole case." General Hayes turned to face her with the same respectful attention he would give to any senior citizen. "What's troubling you, ma'am?" Mrs. Henderson's voice grew stronger as she spoke. "The night of the break-in, I got a good look at the person who robbed me. But when I saw Mr. Williams in court today, something didn't feel right. The man who broke into my house moved differently, talked differently. He was more aggressive, more threatening." The prosecutor shot to her feet. "Your Honor," Mrs. Henderson positively identified Mr. Williams from a photo lineup. "She cannot change her testimony now. Mrs. Henderson turned toward the prosecutor with surprising firmness. Young lady, I identified someone who looked like Mr. Williams, but I never said I was 100% certain it was him. The lighting was poor, I was frightened, and all you show me were pictures, not the actual person. General Hayes sensed an opportunity. Mrs. Henderson, if you were to see this Derek Phillips person that Specialist Williams mentioned, do you think you would be able to tell if he was the one who actually robbed you? The elderly woman nodded slowly. I think so, General. The man who robbed me had a different way of carrying himself. More cocky, more aggressive. Mr. Williams seems like a gentle person, even when he's upset. Judge Hoffman was losing control of her courtroom entirely. This is highly irregular. We cannot simply bring random people into my courtroom for impromptu identification procedures. General Hayes fixed the judge with a stare that had intimidated foreign dignitaries and enemy commanders. Your Honor, with all due respect, what would be irregular would be convicting an innocent veteran based on sloppy police work and prejudice against military service members. The bailiff, who was himself a veteran, stepped forward unexpectedly. Your Honor, if I may, I've been watching Mr. Williams since he entered this courtroom, and I've also been thinking about something. The man in the security video moved like someone with combat training, but his movements were wrong. Too aggressive, too showy. Specialist Williams moves like real military, controlled, and respectful. The prosecutor realized that her case was crumbling before her eyes. Your Honor, I request a recess to consult with my office about these new developments. General Hayes shook his head. Ma'am, these aren't new developments. This information was available from the beginning if anyone had bothered to conduct a proper investigation. The question is whether this court is interested in justice or just in closing cases quickly. Marcus felt tears of relief beginning to replace his tears of despair. For the first time in months, people in positions of authority were actually listening to him and taking his claims seriously. Judge Hoffman found herself in an impossible position. Her treatment of Marcus had been recorded by the court reporter and witnessed by dozens of people. Her prejudicial comments about veterans were now part of the official record. If this case fell apart due to inadequate investigation, her handling of it would be scrutinized and criticized. General Hayes, she said carefully, what exactly are you proposing? General Hayes's response was measured and authoritative. Your Honor, I propose that this case be postponed to allow for a proper investigation. I propose that this Derek Phillips be located and questioned. I propose that Mrs. Henderson be given an opportunity to see both men in person to make a proper identification. And I propose that Specialist Williams be released on his own recognizance pending this investigation. The general paused for effect before continuing. Furthermore, Your Honor, I propose that the treatment of veterans in this courtroom be reviewed by appropriate authorities to ensure that military service members receive the respect and fair treatment they have earned through their sacrifice. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. General Hayes had the connections and authority to make Judge Hoffman's conduct the subject of official review and public scrutiny. Marcus looked up at General Hayes with gratitude beyond words. Sir, thank you for believing in me when no one else would. The general placed a fatherly hand on Marcus's shoulder. Son, we never leave a soldier behind, whether on the battlefield or in a courtroom. That's what military brotherhood means. Mrs. Henderson walked up to Marcus and took his hand gently. Mr. Williams, I owe you an apology. I was so scared and angry about being robbed that I didn't think carefully about whether you were really the person who hurt me. I am sorry. Judge Hoffman, faced with overwhelming pressure from multiple directions, finally capitulated. This court will recess for 2 weeks to allow for additional investigation. Mr. Williams will be released on his own recognizance. Court is adjourned. As the courtroom began to empty, General Hayes turned to Marcus one more time. Specialist Williams, you served your country with honor overseas. Don't let anyone make you ashamed of that service or treat you as less than the hero you are. Marcus stood a little straighter, his military bearing returning as his confidence was restored by the general's words and support. The nightmare wasn't over yet, but for the first time in months, he had reason to hope that justice might actually prevail. 2 weeks later, Derek Phillips was arrested after Mrs. Henderson positively identified him as her actual attacker. Security footage from his workplace showed him leaving during the time of the break-in, contradicting his alibi. The stolen items found in Marcus's apartment had Derek's fingerprints on them underneath Marcus's prints, proving they had been planted. Marcus was completely exonerated, and Judge Hoffman was quietly reassigned to civil court after a judicial review of her conduct. General Hayes attended Marcus's exoneration hearing, and the two men remained in contact as Marcus rebuilt his life and eventually became an advocate for veterans' rights in the legal system.